You know the exact moment I'm talking about, right? It's like 9:00 p.m. You've had a ridiculously stressful day, and you actually just finished a completely filling dinner maybe an hour ago.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. But somehow, almost unconsciously, you just find yourself wandering into the kitchen. The house is totally dark, except for the ambient glow of the open fridge. And you are reaching for a snack.
Even though you aren't actually hungry.
Exactly. You aren't even physically hungry, but you're digging into that bag of crisps or breaking off pieces of a chocolate bar anyway. And then right after that last bite, that massive wave of guilt just hits you.
It's an incredibly universal human experience. It really is. And unfortunately, that guilt, it really only compounds the original stress that drove you to the fridge in the first place.
Which is exactly why today we are going to completely dismantle that guilt. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are digging into the biology of that exact 9:00 p.m. moment.
Yes, and we have some fantastic sources to help us do that.
We do. We're pulling insights from texts like Appetite and Emotion, a great one called The Architecture of Emotional Appetite, and The Wisdom of the Pause. And by the end of this, we are going to prove that your willpower is not the problem here.
No, not at all.
We're going to figure out what your biology is actually screaming for. So the mission today is to demystify emotional eating, strip away all that shame, and really build a toolkit to nourish both your mind and your body.
I love that mission. And, you know, if there is one overarching theme you should hold on to as we unpack this for the listener, it's this. Your body is not your enemy.
Say that again because people need to hear it.
Your body is not your enemy. The cravings, the late-night kitchen wandering, the urge for sugar, it is all communication. Our goal today is to basically give you the translation manual for what your nervous system is actually trying to tell you.
Okay, so let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. There is this massive, a pervasive misconception that emotional eating is just a sign of weak willpower.
Oh, absolutely.
Society treats it like this huge character flaw, right? The implication is always, well, if you just had a bit more discipline, you wouldn't be eating ice cream at midnight. But looking at the neurobiology from our sources, willpower literally has almost nothing to do with it.
Willpower is completely irrelevant in this context. I mean it. Because emotional eating is driven entirely by survival biology.
Wait, really? Survival biology?
Yes, exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain is just ruthlessly efficient at seeking pleasure and avoiding discomfort. That's its job.
Okay.
So when you experience prolonged stress, say, from a really demanding job or financial worries or relationship friction, your body maintains elevated levels of cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Right. And prolonged cortisol elevation, it doesn't just stress you out. It actively hijacks your dopamine pathways. It literally shifts your brain's preference toward high-fat, high-sugar, and high-salt foods.
Because historically, I guess if we were stressed, it meant we were in physical danger.
Right.
Or facing a famine. So those calorie-dense foods were a literal survival mechanism.
Exactly. But today, the threat isn't a predator. It's an unread email inbox.
Right. So my biology is screaming for a quick fix because it thinks I'm trying to survive a life-or-death crisis.
Precisely. And those highly palatable foods, they activate the brain's reward system instantly. They trigger this huge flood of dopamine and serotonin, which, temporarily downregulates the stress response.
So it actually works.
It does. You eat the chocolate, and for about 10 minutes, you genuinely feel a sense of comfort and relief. Your brain is just doing its job. It's using a highly effective, albeit short-term, strategy to help you endure discomfort.
Wow. And because the brain is so efficient, it logs that data, doesn't it? It's like, okay, note to self, stress plus chocolate equals immediate relief.
Yes. And over weeks or months or years, that becomes a deeply ingrained neural pathway.
Okay, let me make sure I'm getting this. It's like my brain has paved a high-speed superhighway directly from, say, a stressful meeting straight to the biscuit tin.
That is a perfect analogy.
So I don't even have to think about driving it anymore. My brain just puts me on cruise control the second my cortisol spikes.
That cruise control is exactly what the texts call a learned habit loop. It becomes entirely automatic. But, and this is the saving grace here, we have neuroplasticity.
Right, the brain's ability to change.
Exactly. The brain is continually adaptable. So you can absolutely stop driving on that high-speed superhighway and, eventually let the grass grow back over it.
That's a huge relief.
It is. You can build new neural pathways that respond to stress with much healthier coping mechanisms.
Which sounds incredibly promising in theory, obviously. But when you were trapped in that automatic loop, hunger just feels like hunger.
Yes, it can be very confusing.
So the very first step to building a new road has to be awareness, right? Like learning to recognize the difference between genuine physical hunger and emotional hunger in the actual moment.
Hmm.
And they present very differently in the body, don't they?
They present in entirely different ways. So let's look at physical hunger first. Physical hunger is a biological need for cellular energy. And because of that, it develops slowly, very gradually.
That creeps up on you.
Right. You'll experience physical, somatic cues, your stomach rumbling, maybe a slight drop in body temperature, or a gradual loss of concentration. But crucially, physical hunger is highly flexible.
Flexible meaning if I'm physically hungry, a bowl of lentil soup or an apple sounds genuinely satisfying. My body isn't dictating exactly what fuel it gets, it just wants fuel.
Yes, precisely. And physical hunger responds to volume and satiety signals. You eat, your stomach stretches, the hormones signal that you are comfortably full, and you just stop. It leaves you feeling nourished and content.
Okay, but what about emotional hunger then?
Emotional hunger originates entirely in the mind, not the stomach. It does not develop slowly, it appears suddenly, and it feels intensely urgent.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's almost like a hostage negotiation. It's entirely rigid, like an apple won't do. You want a specific type of pizza from a specific restaurant, and absolutely nothing else will satisfy the urge.
Exactly. And because emotional hunger is trying to soothe the amygdala, which is the emotion center of the brain, rather than fill the stomach, it can completely bypass your body's physical fullness signals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can eat way past the point of physical discomfort because the emotion you are trying to soothe hasn't been resolved by the food. The physical stretch of your stomach means nothing to an anxious brain.
That is wild. Okay, I track with the distinction there. If I'm suddenly craving a very specific slice of cake and it feels like an absolute emergency, that's a dead giveaway that it's my mind talking.
Right.
But I do want to push back a little here, because isn't it true that sometimes emotional hunger brilliantly disguises itself as genuine physical hunger?
How do you mean?
Like, for example, if I've been pulling late nights at work, I genuinely feel starving the next day. It doesn't feel like an emotional craving. It literally feels like my body is empty.
That is a phenomenal point. And it perfectly highlights how modern life is essentially a minefield of hidden triggers that are just masquerading as hunger.
So sleep is a big one.
Fatigue is arguably the most powerful hidden trigger. If you are listening to this after a terrible night's sleep and you find yourself craving carbohydrates, you have to realize that it is not a character flaw. Your hormones have physically altered.
Because the lack of sleep messes with the hunger hormones, right? Like ghrelin and leptin.
Exactly. Ghrelin is the hormone that tells you to eat, and leptin is the hormone that tells you you're full.
Okay.
When you are sleep deprived, your body produces significantly more ghrelin and much less leptin. Furthermore, your brain is desperate for quick, accessible energy to just keep you awake. Your body's practically screaming for rest, but it interprets that profound exhaustion as a need for immediate caloric fuel.
So if you aren't aware of that mechanism, you will literally eat your exhaustion. You'll spend all day trying to satisfy a sleep deficit with sugar.
You really will.
That fundamentally changes how you look at a craving. It's not, I have no self-control. It's literally my leptin levels have physically dropped because I stayed up until 1 a.m.
Exactly.
What about anxiety? That's another massive trigger we see in the sources, but it feels so mental. How does that translate to the physical act of eating?
Well, with anxiety and worry, the translation to eating is actually incredibly mechanical. When your mind is racing with future-oriented fears, the simple physical act of chewing and tasting provides a somatic grounding technique.
A grounding technique? You mean like how people tap their feet or like pace around the room?
Yes, exactly like that. Chewing provides intense proprioceptive feedback to the brain. It brings your localized attention down to the physical sensations in your jaw and your mouth.
Oh.
Yeah, it essentially forces a temporary distraction from those abstract, anxious thoughts. For those few minutes you are chewing something crunchy or tasting something intensely sweet, your mind is briefly quieted.
That makes total sense. We're using the physical sensation of eating to literally pull ourselves out of a mental spiral.
Exactly.
And I imagine boredom functions similarly, just on a slightly different spectrum. Like, we spend so much time staring at screens, doom scrolling, sitting perfectly still. If the environment is understimulating, the brain just goes looking for dopamine.
It absolutely does. In a low-stimulation environment, food adds immediate sensory richness. You aren't physically hungry. Your brain is just looking for a task to engage with.
Which is so common nowadays.
It is. And the same applies to loneliness, actually. Humans are deeply social, and we thrive on connection. When we feel isolated, food can act as this strange substitute for companionship.
Really? How so?
Well, the sensory experience of a warm, heavy meal can mimic the physiological feelings of safety and comfort we usually get from being around trusted friends.
Oh, that's fascinating. And it's probably important to note that the triggers aren't always negative emotions, right? We also use food heavily for celebration and reward.
Oh, constantly.
Like you finish a massive project or you survive a brutal week and you say, I deserve a treat. Food is a deeply ingrained part of human celebration, culturally and biologically. The issue only arises, according to the sources, when food becomes the only tool we have to reward ourselves.
Yeah, that is the absolute crux of the issue. Whether the trigger is stress, exhaustion, boredom, or celebration, relying on a single tool food for every emotional state is exactly what reinforces that neural superhighway.
But let's be realistic here. I can't magically eliminate stress from my life. I can't guarantee I'll never have a bad night's sleep ever again.
Nobody can.
So if I'm standing in the kitchen and the craving hits like a freight train, and I realize it's one of these triggers, how am I supposed to actually respond?
Yeah.
The literature always talks about using the pause, to
Mhm.
stopping before you open the fridge to check in with yourself.
Yes, the pause is foundational. Before reaching for the food, you take one slow, deliberate breath. You don't tell yourself you can't have the snack because restriction usually backfires anyway.
Right.
You just create a micro moment of space and ask yourself, am I physically hungry or am I feeding an emotion? And if it's an emotion, you ask, what do I truly need right now?
I hear what you're saying about the pause, but honestly, I have to challenge this a bit.
Go for it.
Realistically, when you are at peak stress, your prefrontal cortex, like the logical, analytical part of your brain, is completely offline. You are operating purely out of that reactive amygdala. Telling someone to just take a breath and analyze their feelings when they're staring at a pizza feels a bit like telling a drowning person to critically analyze the water.
That's a great point.
How does this actually work in practice when your biology is fighting you?
It's a completely valid challenge, and it's exactly why that single deliberate breath is not just metaphorical advice. It is a physiological necessity.
A necessity.
Yes. When you are in that stressed, amygdala-driven state, your sympathetic nervous system is running the show. Taking a deep diaphragmatic breath physically stimulates the vagus nerve.
Okay, the vagus nerve.
Right. That physical action downregulates the sympathetic nervous system and actively forces the prefrontal cortex to come back online. That breath is the literal circuit breaker. You aren't analyzing the water while drowning. You are inflating a life vest so you can finally look around.
Okay, I love that. The breath is the circuit breaker. So once the prefrontal cortex is back online and I ask myself, what do I truly need right now?
Mm-hmm.
I might realize I don't actually need the crisps, but I still have the unmet need. This is where we have to build out that emotional toolbox, right?
Yeah, exactly. If food has been your only tool for so long, you need to deliberately cultivate other options to satisfy those specific needs. If you pause and realize your true need is a mood shift like, you need to break out of frustration. You reach into your toolbox and maybe take a 10-minute walk outside.
And why does a walk work specifically? I know people always say endorphins, but there's more to it than just getting fresh air, isn't there?
There is a lot more. Walking creates bilateral stimulation. That's the rhythmic left-right movement of your body.
Oh, like in EMDR therapy.
Exactly like that. This bilateral movement actually helps the brain process and integrate emotional stress. It physically moves the stress through your nervous system while simultaneously shifting your visual environment, which interrupts the habit loop.
That is fascinating. But what if I pause and realize my true need isn't movement? What if it's comfort? Like I'm lonely, I'm cold, I'm overwhelmed, and I just want to be soothed. A walk sounds absolutely terrible in that state.
In that state, your toolbox needs a soothing mechanism. Making a cup of herbal tea like chamomile or peppermint is highly effective.
Just a cup of tea.
But it's not just about the herbs. The process of making tea requires boiling water, which enforces a mandatory waiting period. It physically stretches out that pause, keeping you out of the reactive amygdala. Then, holding a warm mug provides tactile warmth, which actually mimics physical affection, but without the mindless calorie consumption.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess if you realize you are just incredibly tense and holding a ton of physical anxiety, you might use, like, 5 minutes of gentle stretching to physically signal to your muscles that the threat has passed.
Exactly.
Or if you need connection, you call a friend. You don't even have to talk about the stress, right? Just hearing a familiar voice regulates your nervous system. You're basically becoming your own emotional detective. Instead of treating a symptom, the stress, with a handful of sugar, you are investigating the root cause and deploying a targeted solution.
Yes. You are expanding your choices. You are proving to your own brain that you have multiple ways to achieve safety and comfort.
But let's do another reality check here. Because there are absolutely going to be times where I take the pause, I take the deep vagal breath, I recognize I'm stressed. I go for a walk, I drink the tea, I stretch, and at the end of all of that, my brain still says, I just really want a piece of cake.
And that will absolutely happen.
Right? Because the goal isn't to never eat comfort food again. So how do we actually eat the cake without falling right back into that toxic cycle of guilt, shame, and eventual overeating?
Well, the goal is absolutely not deprivation. If you've taken the pause and decided you are going to eat the cake, the most crucial step is what psychologists call delabeling.
Delabeling, taking the moral value off the food.
Yes, we have been so conditioned to label foods as morally good or bad, which inherently labels us as good or bad for eating them. You are not a virtuous person for eating broccoli, and you are not a failure for eating ice cream.
Right.
Food is just a collection of macronutrients and sensory experiences. It has no moral weight whatsoever.
This is so difficult, though, because it's so culturally ingrained. Like, we constantly say things like, oh, I'm being so bad today, when we order a dessert.
All the time.
But attributing that moral weight is exactly what sets up the restriction binge pendulum, isn't it? If I view the cake as this evil villain, eating it feels like a massive transgression. That triggers intense shame, which spikes my cortisol again, which then drives me to eat more cake to soothe the new stress.
You nailed it. Shame is a stressor. If you remove the moral judgment, the cake just loses its power. It is just cake. You can enjoy it as a neutral part of your week. But the second part of enjoying it without guilt is mindful eating.
Okay, so being present.
If you are going to eat it, you owe it to yourself to actually experience it.
Right, because if I'm eating it to soothe an emotion, I usually eat it mindlessly while staring at the television. I barely even taste it.
And that defeats the entire purpose. It takes about 20 minutes for the brain to receive the complex cascade of fullness and satiety signals from the gut. So you must eat slowly. Put the fork down between bites.
Turn off the TV.
Turn off the television and put your phone in another room. Notice the texture, the temperature, the aroma. When you are fully neurologically present with the sensory experience of the food, you often find you are completely satisfied with a much smaller portion.
Like, you pause halfway through and check in. Is this still delivering that peak pleasure? Or am I just finishing it because it's on the plate?
Precisely. It brings intentionality back to the experience.
So it's almost like building a brick house. I love thinking about overall health this way from the sources. If I'm building a house out of thousands of bricks, dropping one brick or laying one slightly crooked isn't going to cause the entire foundation to collapse.
Not at all.
A single heavy comfort food meal isn't going to undo months of mindful habits. It's just one brick. The strength of the house is about the consistent placement of thousands of bricks over years.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. Progress and consistency will always trump perfection. You lay the crooked brick, you acknowledge it without judgment, and you simply focus on laying the next brick straight.
But I do want to make sure we address something critical here. Because for some listeners, it doesn't feel like just one crooked brick. If emotional eating is causing severe, constant distress, if you're obsessing over food all day, if it's dictating your mood, or causing you to avoid social situations entirely, then we aren't just talking about a minor habit adjustment.
Absolutely not. And the texts we are exploring today make this explicitly clear. If your relationship with food is leaving you feeling chronically anxious, ashamed, or emotionally exhausted, you do not have to tackle this alone.
Right. If the foundation of the house is crumbling, there is absolutely no shame in calling in a professional contractor.
Well said.
Whether that is a registered dietitian, a psychologist, or a licensed counselor. Bringing in an expert to help you inspect the foundation is a sign of immense courage and self-preservation, not a failure.
It is the ultimate form of self-care. Professionals understand the neurobiology and the psychology we've discussed today. Their role is to help you develop highly personalized strategies to address the underlying drivers, like maybe unresolved trauma, chronic anxiety, or depressive episodes in a safe, non-judgmental environment.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. To synthesize all of this for you listening, emotional eating is a profoundly human, deeply biological response to navigating a stressful world. Your brain paved a superhighway to high-reward foods to protect you and to soothe you. It is not a failure of willpower.
But you have the neuroplasticity to pave a new road. By understanding how hidden triggers like sleep deprivation and anxiety hijack your hormones, you can begin to intercept the habit loop. You utilize the pause as a physiological circuit breaker, pulling your brain out of the reactive amygdala and back into logical thought.
You build an emotional toolbox rich with bilateral movement, somatic grounding, and connection, so food isn't your only coping mechanism. And when you do choose to eat for comfort, you eat mindfully, shedding the moral labels and savoring every single bite.
You rebuild trust with your own body.
So to bring it all back to that moment in the kitchen at 9 p.m., the house is quiet, the fridge is open. The next time you find yourself standing in that ambient glow, reaching for your ultimate comfort food, don't judge it. Take a deep vagal breath, drop the shame, and ask yourself this: what specific unmet need in my life does this food represent right now, and how else could I give myself permission to truly satisfy it today?